All right, ladies and gentlemen, we got Rob Walling, a serial entrepreneur, author, investor on the podcast today. I'm really excited to talk with you today. Thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. The number of books I've written is catching up to the number of companies I've started now. 5 books, 6 companies.
I want to bring it back and just get a little background on, have you always had this entrepreneurial DNA, or was there an inflection point where it made sense to go down this path?
For me, it was probably middle school. I think 5th grade, if I recall, where I grew up. We always had enough food. My dad was an electrician, so solidly working class, but there was no extra money to do anything ever. And so back in the day, I'm this old, you had a Walkman and you had batteries, and I would run out of batteries, and it's like, I really want more batteries. And it's like, we don't have money for batteries. It's like, gosh dang it. So I had to figure out, how do I buy all the books? Because I'm an avid reader. How do I buy books, batteries, and just stuff, right? And so I was like, I want to make money. And so I started reselling things. Like, I would go to the comic store, I would buy comic books for my own collection, and then I would buy extras and I'd resell them at a markup at school. I also did that with candy. I found out the margins on candy going to Costco or Price Club back then. It was like, I forget, it was like a 10x markup. I could get a pack of Now and Later's, a short pack, for 3 cents each, and I was selling for a quarter a piece. So almost, what is that, an 8x markup? And it changed my life. Because I was like, oh, well, now I have money to do things I want. And then you could use that to parlay up.
I love that. That seems to be a common theme, a pattern with a lot of entrepreneurs: candy, baseball cards, comic books. Lemonade stands. I ran a pop stand. But I didn't do the math like you did, where like, oh, that's a 10x markup. And then I think I kind of just then got distracted and whatever with other things of childhood. But I have a feeling that you took that and then you continued going down the path. And what would you say was like the next, I guess, serious, somewhat serious, or were things where you took it up a level?
Yeah. It was in high school where I bought like a ebook. It wasn't an ebook. That's funny. It wasn't electronic, but it was like a pamphlet or a book that they sold, where they're like, you can write books, nonfiction books about topics you understand, and you can sell them through classified ads. And so I did. I knew a ton about comic collecting, and I'd run a comic, like a dealer, like not a store per se. We didn't have a storefront, but my brother and I would buy and mark up and sell. And so I wrote a booklet, I guess you'd call it, about comic collecting, and then one about getting published in comics, because I had a couple friends who were artists and I interviewed them and blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, what was that, like 15, 16? And sold them in ads. And that one actually probably made me more money than selling candy, but it was not per hour. Like, it was way more work, because I wrote them and I printed them out on my Apple IIe and the image writer, and then placed ads in the paper and stuff. So overall, I probably made hundreds of dollars from that, single digits. But it was such an experience to create something and sell it multiple times. Even if I only sold 10, 20 copies, it was a neat experience. And so when I say I've written 5 books now, I guess I don't count those books as in that tally.
Yeah. Do you have kids?
Yeah, two teenagers.
So my wife is pregnant with our first, and I'm thinking about how to raise an entrepreneurial child and just like give them those tools. And part of me wonders, is it simply a need? Like, you wanted batteries and you wanted things, and so you found a way, or are there ways to still provide for your kids and give them what they need and want sometimes, but create that desire within them? What have you thought about this?
A lot, yeah, because my kids are older, and so they're 14 and 18, and we've talked to them since they were young about entrepreneurship and the ability to control your own destiny and the freedom that it gives you to not have to work for other people. Working for other people is great. It's fine. I did it. My wife did it. But at a certain point, I got really, really tired of it. And that became the new motivation, actually. So if we were to skip forward in my entrepreneurial journey of like, well, why did you keep doing it? Because I didn't need batteries. I had money to buy batteries, when I was a software developer full-time working for a credit card company. But I hated the day job so much that became my motivation of, I want to work for myself. I want to make the money so that I can work on whatever I want to whenever I do. So all that said, yes, my wife and I have talked a lot about this actually, and we recorded a podcast episode on the Zen Founder podcast, and it's one of the first 10 episodes, and it's how to raise entrepreneurial kids. And we actually took that episode and then did we haven't written the book, but we have a whole book outline, how to raise entrepreneurial kids, that we started writing it, and then we tabled it to write the new book, which is Exit Strategy, right? It's about how to sell your company. But the thought process, I think it's a lot of conversations. I would watch YouTube videos. I was telling kids, like, this is what your mom and dad do, right? We are entrepreneurs, and this is why. And explaining it to them. And then figuring out, like, one of our kids, I think, will maybe want to be an entrepreneur because he's selling stuff on eBay now, and he's 14, and he'll win something at auction, like clothing or tennis, like really nice sneakers or whatever. And then he fixes them up, he gets new laces, and then he marks them up and sells them. And it's like, oh, spitting image, he's pretty close to the tree. So I talk a lot with him. I talk a lot about it because he's, kind of seems to have that drive. And for him, the motivation is, well, I want to make money, and the allowance we pay not very much to motivate them to do their own thing to earn it. So the other son, though, really doesn't do much entrepreneurial stuff, even though we've talked a lot about it. But I've read Rich Dad, Poor Dad with both of them. And YouTube's a great thing to just kind of, and eventually they get bored of it, but I want them to just be exposed to it and understand what it is. Mm-hmm. But I don't, much like any particular interest, like sports or playing Dungeons and Dragons, I don't think you can or should push a child to be an entrepreneur, but you expose them to it, show them the pros and cons, and some folks I think are drawn to it.
What do you think is missing in the current, you hear a lot of entrepreneurs bashing on the school system and how it's just like indoctrination for cogs in a machine, basically. And
Big time.
What do you think is missing? What would you do differently? Would you homeschool? Would you unschool? There's not crazy, but there's a lot of alternatives, it seems like, these days. If your kids if you put them in public school or private school, whatever, what are the skills and lessons and values that you think need to be supplemented?
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And that's how I think about it, is supplementing. I agree with the take that it's cog in a wheel. It's training folks to work 9 to 5s or be, someone on a factory floor. I also think the social aspects of school are super important. I think learning to work in that dynamic and to go through it has been important. We have both homeschooled. We've had kids in private school. We've had kids in public school. All 3 options. And they all have pros and cons. These days, one kid is in college and the other one is in high school, and they both go to public schools, frankly. The supplementary stuff, to be honest, the number one thing that I think is missing from our curriculum, and the number one thing that I've taught our kids, or my wife and I have taught, is just personal finance. It's not even entrepreneurship. It's just basic budgeting and thinking about money coming in, money going out. You're not going to have as much money as you think. You're not going to have as much money as we do. When we started out, we had this tiny little 1-bedroom apartment because we live in a pretty big house here in Minnesota. And it's like, you're not going to have that. Like, let's set expectations about what your life's actually going to look like. And the crappy used car that you're going to buy for a few $1,000s, or maybe we'll give you, this 10-year-old car we have. But it's setting that expectation of, you will have to budget, be careful of credit card debt, all these things that maybe my parents didn't tell me and I had to learn, I think that's the number one thing, is personal finance. Number 2, I think entrepreneurship, but see, entrepreneurship is not for everyone, and it shouldn't be. I think there's a subset of folks who really want that and really can handle the uncertainty and really do want the freedom and the purpose that comes from that. But not everyone should. But I do think they should be exposed to it. And my older child, who, when they were in high school, they did take a entrepreneurship class, which was better than nothing. They taught him about patents, trademarks, copyright. They talked about what a profit and loss statement is, how money comes in, how you have to make it was very basic, fundamental stuff. I appreciated it so that they could at least be exposed to it.
You mentioned something, uncertainty, and that's something that I think is a constant. I don't know. At whatever level, there's always uncertainty. How have you navigated through that, and what kind of self-talk do you what do you remind yourself of, or how do you stay strong through uncertainty?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because all of us deal with it. Whether I look back 20 years when I was working a day job, and the uncertainty was, are these 20 hours a week that I'm working nights and weekends with a wife and a young child, will they ever pay off, or am I just delusional and wasting my time, right? And that's a tough burden to bear of like, could I be doing something more? Could I be, making money as a freelancer instead of working on my own projects that right now are generating nothing? All the way up to present day, where I run 2 multi-million-dollar companies. I've written 5 books, and I could tomorrow decide to never work again and I'd be fine. But there's still uncertainty in things that I do, and a lot of things that I do. So I think the thing that I've learned, because I was really risk averse, partially when I was coming up as an entrepreneur, partially because we had no backstop. Like, we didn't have parents that had money. So if we failed, like if we missed the house payment, you're out of luck, or miss the rent payment, frankly, when we live in an apartment. And so a big thing that I had to do to help with that was, when I felt really stressed about things, I would write down, what's my plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, if anything goes wrong. Like, what if this doesn't work? And what's really the worst that can happen? And the thing with working 20 hours a week, nights and weekends, the worst that could happen is I wasted the time. That was it. And so I was willing to take that risk, As I got my business going and, quit the day job and I was doing like freelancing 2-3 days a week, and then working on products that were generating maybe a few $1,000s a month at the time. There was always the uncertainty of, will it work? Will it work? But then I asked myself, well, what if it doesn't? Well, then I'll go back to freelancing. Like, I could always go back to that. There was always the fallback of, I can still write code, dollars for hours, not what I want to do, but I can support the family. So that was a big coping mechanism for me, because I tend to be I have anxiety. Like, if, most of us have either anxiety or depression. Like, it's just of some sort, some degree, and I'm on the anxious side. So what's the worst that can happen is a big thing. I think being around other entrepreneurs that are either where you are or just ahead of you, and you can get some reassurance from them, and a sanity check. Sometimes I'll freak out about something like, oh my gosh, I have to fire this person. This is terrible. Talk about like the worst experiences, And I talked to a couple of my founder entrepreneur friends, and they're like, yeah, I had to fire someone a couple months ago. You'll be fine. And it's like having folks to sanity check it with you. I'm in a couple mastermind groups where it's 3 or 4 other entrepreneurs, and they support me in that realm too. So I think all of those, there's a lot of, to be honest, my wife, she's a psychologist, Dr. Sherry Walling, and I wrote a book called The Entrepreneur's Guide to Keeping Your Shit Together. And it's like 10 chapters all about this kind of stuff: mindset, getting over uncertainty, how to avoid burnout, dealing with like, how do you stay married and not implode while being a founder? So I'd recommend that. You can, find it online or Amazon. Yeah, it's a good one.
All right. So next kind of topic that I'm really curious about, because I see parts of my own characteristics in this, and it's, you have so much going on. You do books, you do podcasts, you run a community, you have 2 businesses. How do you break that out, and how do you actually make progress in all aspects rather than just spinning your wheels and going like, what's the breakdown look like?
So I will I'll tell you exactly how I do it. But for the first thing I want to say is, if you're just starting out, or if you are, say, in the early stages of business, or you're kind of getting going and you're trying to grow a business, don't do what I'm doing. Don't do a bunch of things. You need focus. You want focus. So don't start a podcast and write books and do all this stuff. I'm doing that now because I'm 20 years into my career, and I have things that are just going. I have a full-time book project manager, and all she does is, when my wife and I, or when I write another book, she handles everything soup to nuts. All I have to do is write it. Now, when I say write it, I actually have a writing coach / ghostwriter that I work with, where I basically take podcast episodes, YouTube videos I've already recorded, and then I'll record audio. My wife and I, for our new book, Exit Strategy, we recorded a bunch of podcast conversations that just went straight to this writer / writing coach, editor, and she developmentally puts a first draft in front of us. It's all our thoughts, it's all our words in essence, and then we edit, right? So that's how I can write this many books, is that now the first 4 I wrote every word of them, so I do want to be clear there. But all that said, the reason I can do it is because I have help. My podcast, which is, I'm about to record the 750th episode. It's been going weekly since 2010. The reason I can do that is I've just always done it, and I really, really enjoy it. It's actually a hobby, more of a hobby for me than work. So I'd never included that. As I was starting software companies and growing them and selling them, I just kept doing the podcast because it's super fun. But how long does it take me to put out a 30-minute podcast episode? Approximately 30 minutes, because I don't edit. I don't post it to WordPress. I don't write show notes. I don't do anything. I have a team, or it used to just be one person, but now, it's a whole team. So that's how I do it. The 2 companies I have, basically, you might call them general managers who do the day-to-day, who manage the teams. The companies are only 6, one is 6 people and one is 5 people. So they're small, but they're multi-million-dollar because it's tech, right? So there's high leverage. One's a venture fund that has invested in almost 200 startups. And I do spend time on on Zoom every week doing all that, but I don't have to, I'm not actually fulfilling anything. I'm not writing code. I'm not installing electrical outlets like I used to. I was an electrician, first job out of college. I'm not actually doing day to day. I'm not doing that much. I don't have that much responsibility, even though I am, doing all of this stuff. So my advice is, if you're getting started, just focus on one thing and just hammer it, because that's what I did. And then once I got to the point where things were working, I had quit my day job. I had a lot of time on my hands. Then it was like, well, I'm going to start this podcast, and I'm going to start this event around the podcast. It's all related. Everything I do now is in this same ecosystem. That's probably the last piece of advice I would give is, at one point I had multiple businesses, but they were all different, just completely disparate, and that was brutal. It was really hard. But now I can just focus on software or SaaS entrepreneurs. And if you look, everything that you mentioned that I do, the community, the venture fund, the books, the podcast, the YouTube channel, whatever else I do, it's all SaaS entrepreneurs. And so I can stay in that same mindset, and even advising, right? I can stay in that same mindset in a given day, even though I'm doing a lot of different things.
Okay, part 2 to that question is, I think a lot of people would love to have that kind of lifestyle, and that, that's my dream. I have teams, I got systems in place, and I just kind of go in and do my zone of genius. Is this something that you had as the 10-year vision? The heart of this question, I want to understand how you've gotten clear on your vision, how you set goals and actually achieve them. And hopefully it's not just like the answer if we use the system called Traction, because I understand Traction. I get it.
Never.
You don't use Traction. Okay.
No. We're too small. I've never had a company big enough that would use it. Yeah. Here's my secret. Well, so different entrepreneurs do it differently. Certain folks want a system, and so they turn to Traction, which is EOS's system, or they're scaling up, which I think is for a little bigger companies. I don't like process very much. I tend to be more of an intuition-driven founder, but I'm very much on singular focus and one goal. And so when I was working a day job, my only goal was to quit the day job. It was I need $8,000 a month in profit to quit the day job. I need $8,000 a month on the side so that I can quit the day job. And that became my number one focus. And I started hammering on it in 2005, and I achieved it in December of 2008. So it took me about 3.5 years, I think. And there were a lot of ups and downs. I launched stuff that didn't work. I acquired a piece of software for $10,000, and I kind of got duped and scammed. It wasn't actually worth it. And then my back was to the wall. So then I made that work, and suddenly I grew it. Years, nights and weekends, I grew it to $3,000, $4,000 a month, just that piece of software, right? Underneath my salary job, right? But my focus became that, and I didn't really care about anything else aside from my family. Mm-hmm. All I wanted to do was get there. And so when you ask about, there are folks out there that may want kind of my work life today. Did I envision that I would ever work like this? No, I didn't know that. I just wound up here. Mm. My goals were in order: quit the day job. And then I quit the day job, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have so much more time. Because if you think about it, I was working 40 hours a week at a day job in person. I drove in, and then 20 hours nights and weekends, give or take. So suddenly the 40-hour week day job went away. And I was like, I have like 40 hours that I used to work that I'm not working anymore. So then it was like, well, what's my next thing? What do I want to do? And it was like, make the income more stable. So the next couple of years it was just that. It was like, put one foot in front of the other. The systems back in the day were my intrinsic motivation I wanted three things. I wanted freedom, like freedom from a day job and freedom to work on what I wanted. I wanted purpose. I really enjoy working on interesting things. And these days, my purpose is obviously helping entrepreneurs. And then I wanted strong relationships, right? My wife, my kids, my friends. So freedom, purpose, and relationships became kind of the underlying thing. These days, you might ask, well, how do you continue to, what are your goals? What keeps driving you, right? And one thing is there's a lot of people that rely on me, and that's actually helpful. There's an audience that expects a podcast episode every week. I have two teams of people who need my advice, guidance, and leadership on my, in my companies. And so they make me show up, and they're like, you have to ship this YouTube video. You have to make a decision. We have to make a decision on investing in these companies, and so they're pulling me, and that's actually helpful because they're kind of managing me. So, I don't know if I fully answered your question, but that's, those are my thoughts on it.
No, I actually like that. I think your pinpoint, you said you're an intuition driven leader, and that's why I have friction with the EOS. I understand the value of it, but I also feel like I lean more into intuitive and
Yep.
But I think what you also said is really powerful, that you have to stay committed to like one goal. Like your goal was make $8,000 a month, and I think I need to
be laser focused. Yep. And do whatever it takes. And you know what? Ton of hard work to get there is what it's going to take. And also you're going to have to do some stuff you don't want to do. A lot of stuff you don't want to do. By the time I got to $8,000 a month, I was running like 4 or 5, might even have been 6 software products. I didn't care about most of them. Like they were serving markets I didn't care about. They were boring businesses making $1,000 or $2,000 a month. But I didn't care that I didn't care about them, because the goal was quit the day job. As long as these are like ethical, I'm not going to rip people off, but like ethical businesses that provide value for someone. One of them was like a job board for electricians, and one of them was an ebook about bonsai trees and this and that. And I acquired some of them and created the other ones. Do I care about those things? Am I passionate about it? No. Am I passionate about quitting my day job? Yes. So that's really what got me there.
Are there any lessons or... Yeah, I'll just keep it at that. Lessons that come to mind, or systems, I should say, that you have learned and developed in the SaaS world that you see other businesses like the trades could implement that they don't? Like, what transferable lessons are there out there that you think get missed?
It's a good question, actually. And, having been a construction family, like my dad was an electrician and then a project manager in the electrical trade for 42 years. And then my brother runs an electrical contractor in California. I have some familiarity with that. And I worked in the field for 2 years, installing lights just as a apprentice, basically. And things that I talk with my brother about are often like, how you have an office and he's in the Bay Area. It's very expensive, not only to hire people to come into an office, but just the office is expensive. And I say, we don't even have an office. Like we've raised $42 million in venture funding, and we've invested in 192 companies. And there are 6 of us, and none of us live in the same city. And it works. So we started talking about that of like, do you need an office for people to come into, or could you get a smaller office and maybe you hire remote folks? You can hire someone in South America, you can hire someone in Canada if you want the same time zones, and they are less expensive resources, and they can be super reliable to do office work, even like estimating and this and that. It's like, do you need a team of estimators? Like a lot of everyone we worked for in the 80s, 90s, and aughts, the big firms have a big estimating team. And I was like, what would it be like to outsource that? Just what would that feel like? I'm not saying you should, but being a little more cognizant of it's called geo arbitrage, right? Which is like, I can hire someone in Canada for 20 or 30% less than the US, and I can hire someone in Mexico, Central and South America for, 50% less. It's like significant. And so finding the skill set is hard, or can be hard, but I know there are folks out there doing it. So those are a couple. I think it's just, to me, it's having that sense of not being scared to try new things and fail a bit. You don't want to bet the company on anything, on any of these, but I don't think you're betting the company. You know, I think there's a spirit in startups, and especially in like software, of changing things frequently and taking small bets that have asymmetric upside. It's like, I'm going to bet on this marketing channel. I'm going to bet on this hire. I'm going to bet on whatever. If it doesn't work out, that's a bummer. If it does, wow, the payback is really big. And trades don't tend to do that, you know, because it's kind of been the trade's been the same way for 60, 70 years, you know, and I think you can get into a rut. Again, I'm saying this from conversations that my brother and I have had, you know, of just like, I was trying to question everything that he does. And he was too. He was asking me like, tell me more, you know, I want to think through all of this. So I think that spirit of, now you can't over innovate, because, you know, the margins aren't the same, right? They're different businesses, SaaS versus a construction firm. But I do think there's room for folks to think more about it.
Yeah, I like that. Asymmetric bets. Are there any asymmetric bets that come to mind that you've taken that have really paid off?
Yeah, a bunch. Couple of the books that I've written were like, I'm going to spend, the first one took me about 4 months to write because I didn't have much else going on. And the SaaS playbook, I think, took me about 18 months because it was like, on the side. And each of those, I was like, if this succeeds, that will be good. But the first book, Start Small, Stay Small. I was like, if I sell like $6,000-$8,000 worth of books, cool. It'll be worth the time. And it's fun to get books in people's hands. Mm-hmm. And that book has sold $350,000 worth of books. I mean, it's just shocking, right? So it was a bet of my time and kind of and building the audience. And look, it's not just the revenue. I mean, the audience building from that book and SaaS Playbook is incredible. SaaS Playbook just passed 37,000 copies sold. It's like crazy. It's the most popular thing I've ever done outside of the podcast. So those were asymmetric bets, and they made more money. I don't write books to make money, and yet they do because I have the audience, so those are asymmetric. There's two others. I acquired a small SaaS product called HitTail back in 2011. And I had about $50,000 in my business bank account that I had built up over years. I quit the job in 2008. And then I just put anything that I didn't pull into the personal account went into this business account. I had 50 grand. I've never seen 50,000. Like my parents, I don't think ever had $50,000 in their bank account. So it was incredible. Like this, what do I do with this, So I bought a small SaaS product that was just on its last leg. It was an SEO keyword tool, and I spent $31,000, I forget.
Wow.
It was a big fucking bet for me.
Yeah.
And I was terrified, man. And the business was doing a couple $1,000s a month. Most of that was net profit, maybe $2,500 if I recall. And I grew that on my own with a couple contractors, just freelancers, to $30,000 a month. And it was like a 90% net profit, right? So I was making like 25 grand-ish, 27 grand. And from the time that I bought the business, I sold it in 2015, so 4 years, all the revenue plus the exit price was $1 million. And it was, again, the revenue was mostly profit. The margins are 90+%. It completely changed our life, not in the sense of, look, I'm going to buy a Maserati, but it just like, it was like, we like funded half the kids' college fund from that. Yeah. We like paid off our car. You know what I mean?
Right.
So talk about asymmetric. Now, here's the thing. Why could I make that work? Well, one, I happen to have $30,000 in the bank that I could spend. No, I didn't happen to. I worked my fucking ass off for 11 years prior to that, nights and weekends, to make it work, right? I happened to have technical skill. I was a software developer. No, I didn't happen to do that. I taught myself when I was an electrician. I was going to the library nights and weekends. That's the pattern. You're going to hear me say the drinking game, nights and weekends. And I taught myself Perl and HTML. And so I had the skill to do, the ASP it was written in. And I happened to take the risk. The night that it closed, that I wired the money, I was for HitTail, I was talking to my wife and I started crying and I said, I don't think I can do this. Like, I think I've made a huge mistake and I'm terrified. And she was like, Rob, this is what you do. This is what you do, man. You would regret it if you didn't try it. And if you lose the 30 grand, it's a big deal. We'd never owned a new car. It's like we'd never spent that much on anything, right? But if it works, it'll be a thing. So that was That was another asymmetric bet. And the one after that, I then took that money from Hittail and I parlayed it into a company that I started from scratch called Drip and sold that one. That was the moment that I was like, oh, I don't have to work anymore. I'm 42 years old and I could retire. So all of them were asymmetric bets, but they started really small, and each one was like a 10x larger outcome, right? 10x, 10x, 10x. And it took me a long time to get there compared to folks who maybe raise funding and get lucky, but I don't like relying on luck. I want to rely on hard work and skill to get there and make it repeatable.
What amazing encouragement from your wife there, Rob. This is what you do. That's pretty awesome.
It's great to have a partner like that for sure.
So I just listened to this My First Million podcast with the Replit founder. I'm blanking on his name, but he was talking about Replit now has this Replit AI agent or whatever for building their own apps and for SaaS. And I mean, it got me hyped. I'm like, okay, cool. I can now basically like Chat GPT build my own app using this other software. But what are you most excited about right now with the new wave of AI, and how should we be thinking about this, and how can we position ourselves to surf this wave?
I'll give you a quick answer, and then I want to ask a clarifying question about the rest of it. I think everyone can use ChatGPT or Claude or one of those tools on a day-to-day or a week-to-week basis. And if you're like, well, what can I use it for? Find out. Ask it. Say, I am an XYZ, a freelance videographer. Here's what I do on a day-to-day basis. Here's what I do on a week-to-week basis. Maybe I write scripts. Maybe I put bullet points. Maybe whatever. I invoice people. Just try to write everything you do. How can you help me be better at this? Like, ask it. Start there.
Wow. Yeah.
I use it. I write books. I keep saying this, but coming up with the title of a book is really hard because it's got to be good and it can't be taken. And then you have to get a domain name that can't be taken. And I like .coms because I'm bougie like that. And so I will sit and chat with ChatGPT for an hour or two to try to find the title and the subtitle. Talked to my brother running the electrical firm, and I was like, ChatGPT. So we started using it, and he's asking it all kinds of stuff about conversions of electrical things, or about feeders, or about, just about anything. Just ask it. Now, you don't rely 100% that it's 100% factual all the time because it does hallucinate, but it gets you 95% of the way there in a lot of tasks. So I think anyone who's not doing it will become like folks maybe in the 80s who just never quite started using computers. Folks like that. Like my parents are 80 years old now. And they bought us a computer, and I'm really appreciative of that, but they never used computers. And so they fell behind. And I think anyone who's not using some type of AI chat interface, kind of learning what it can do, because it's just going to get more complicated and more powerful. So if you don't ride with it and try to do it 5-10 years from now, you're going to be like, wow, I can't do it now. It's too much. It's too complicated. So that's kind of, it wasn't that short of an answer, but that was my initial reaction. But more than that, or to clarify, I guess you said, how can we be using it? And I guess the question is like, in what context? Like who's we? Is it like freelancers? Is it, what's the...
people that want to build their own SaaS product.
Okay. Oh yeah. All right. Good. Then now that clarifies it. Yeah. I think tools, there's varying degrees of wanting to build your own SaaS product, right? There's I know a bunch of software developers who use AI. There's Cursor AI and there's Copilot, and there's things that are it's like wearing a mech suit. You're still the human at the center, but the mech suit makes you better, stronger, faster, right? And that's what it's augmentation. But if you don't already know how to code, I don't believe, my understanding, I used to know how to code, and I just, I haven't done it in 10 years. I don't believe Cursor and Copilot will help you. So then you move over more to this, there's no code and low code stuff. Mm-hmm. And then there's Replit, which would do it with AI. I think any of those tools, it depends on your skill set and what you want to build. No code and low code are super interesting. So these are tools like Airtable, Bubble. There's a bunch of Zapier, there's a bunch of others. We have several internal apps that we use to produce our podcasts, just workflow stuff that we built completely by non-technical folks on my team. in Airtable. You can build some very interesting stuff with no code. We've actually funded only a couple out of, again, 192 companies. I think there's maybe 3 that are no code. And the struggle is they eventually have to rewrite into code. So I'm bullish on no code being a thing. I don't know that it is. I think it's a good way to get an MVP and prove an idea. Then you do need to figure out how to write it in code. So that turns us to Replit. Now, I've heard of Replit. I don't have experience with it personally, but me, if I were starting out and I couldn't code and I wanted to build SaaS, I would 100% consider messing around with it and seeing what it can do. You know, I think there are a lot of tools. I have a friend of mine who's a product manager at a SaaS company, a big $50 million SaaS company, but he doesn't code and on the side wants to build a SaaS. And he's using all these tools. There's Replit. There's a whole ecosystem of AI, like build your thing with AI to where it is code, but you don't have to know how to code. Now, the danger, of course, is does it have bugs in it? How maintainable will it be in the long term? If you get to 10K MRR, monthly recurring revenue, you quit your day job. Is it brittle? Is it, I don't know. I just don't know enough about it. Do I think it can get you off the ground 10 times faster with 10 times less knowledge of technology? I do. And usually the hardest part of building a SaaS is marketing and sales and building something people want and finding anyone willing to pay for it. So, let's get this stuff built with AI. I have no qualms with it, but I haven't done it myself. I'm just watching people do it and I'm like, bravo,
Something, we got a couple of minutes left here, and something I want to dive into is the mindset part. And I know you wrote a book on this, but so I'm going to read that. But what's something that that you've noticed with, you have a lot of yourself, you're successful, you have a successful network, friends. What are some commonalities or patterns or characteristics, skills? Insert any more clarifying words there that you think they embody that separates them from the rest of the pack?
So like personality traits of the best founders type thing?
Yeah.
People who get shit done and are successful?
You sum that up so much simpler.
I'm a podcaster, man. I've spoken millions of words. I've given a ton of thought about this. I've actually done a couple talks specifically on this topic. But I'll just tell you maybe 2 or 3. I think I have a talk called like the 9 personality traits, right? And I go deep into it, but just 2 or 3 in the interest of time. The first one is that they do a lot of stuff quickly. They just ship a bunch of stuff. If I'll talk specifically about software and SaaS founders. They make decisions fast, and if I give them advice or they realize, oh, I need to go hire this person, it's like that day or the next day they have a job description. The day after that, it's posted, whether they hire a recruiter, whether they're doing it themselves. They just move really fast. And I don't mean they flail around. They're not doing 20 things, and they shouldn't be doing 18 of them because that's a whole other issue. They do a lot of things quickly. The second thing is most of the things, not all, most of them are generally directionally correct and wind up working. And most can be like 55, 60, 70%. It doesn't need to be that many. In fact, there's, I think is it Andre Agassi who he gave a commencement speech at a graduation, and he said, I'm one of the winningest tennis players of all time. I've won 80, don't quote me, but the 81% of all of my matches. And across all those matches, I've won 55% of the points. So think about that. Wow. 55% of the points, 81% of the matches. You don't need to be right that often to actually do it. So that's the second trait is these entrepreneurs. And a lot of stuff you do, it isn't right the first time. It's like, I'm going to try this marketing approach or this new sales thing or implementing a feature or hiring. And you'll do it and it's like, it's not working. So then they kind of figure out, well, how do I iterate that? I don't give up. Oh, that doesn't work. Oh, it doesn't work anymore. The advice I got is wrong. They tweak, and they get it there, And again, it's enough of the time. You don't need everything to work, but you get it there. So it's ship things fast. Working on mostly the right things is the other one. They're right most of the time, but I watch entrepreneurs the ones who don't succeed and who continually get in their own way are the folks that make an excuse why stuff won't work. They blame Google. They blame everyone else. They don't take responsibility. And they work on the wrong things. That's a big thing, is like, you have to ask yourself when you're growing a business, like, what is the number one bottleneck right now? What is the number one thing keeping us from making more money, more profit, more customers, whatever? Usually there's just one bottleneck. And being able to identify that there's some experience, there's some intuition, and there's some maybe outside advice. I still ask for, even this many years into my career, I still ask for outside advice about what should I be working on? I ask my mastermind, I ask my co-founder, whatever. So I think there's like 3 or 4 things in there, but you can tell. And the anti-patterns are deep, and I see it. The anti-patterns, meaning the ones that keep people from succeeding, are usually the opposite. It's like Han and Han not shipping it, taking 3 weeks to write the job description. Why did it take you 3 weeks? Or generally working on the wrong things, because you know what? Oftentimes the right things are hard, or you don't want to do them. Do you really want to write that next? Do you really want to run Google AdWords today and set that up? That sounds boring. Do I really want to write this SEO article to get more traffic to my website? That sounds boring. And maybe I have doubts SEO doesn't work. It's like, that's the hard stuff. Doing a sales call, like, I don't really want to do sales, so blah, 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 right? It's like avoiding things and convincing yourself that you don't need to do them because you don't want to do them. And those two things are not the same.
That's good. Okay, slight left turn here. You had talked about the giving talks. This was one of your talks, podcasting, speaking. How do you approach, you have been prolific with your content creation. What's your mindset around creating valuable content? How do you have a formula, a format? How do you maintain this consistency, and is it just become a natural thing, or are there ingredients that you always try to bake into it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's like, what's your process?
Yeah, what's your process?
I didn't used to. I've been creating content now. I started blogging in 2005, so about 20 years ago. That was hard and a lot of time and clunky. I go back and read those posts and I'm like, these are okay. They're not that great. But podcasting, I think, is what changed it for me. And that was 2010, so 14 years ago. Because then I had to ship something every week, 30 minutes-ish. And it forces you to gather your thoughts, to speak, to summarize and speak well. I think the big thing, and I didn't used to be very good at it at all. And then years in, I was like, okay, I feel like I'm relatively competent at this now. I think a big part of it, really the first thing, is I know my audience very, very well. And if you know exactly who your audience is, what their needs, their hopes, their desires, what keeps them up at night, you can create content for them. And if you get a lot of questions from people at in-person events or online or direct emails or direct messages, like, you start to just get a sense of what people are thinking about and worried about. And I just file all of those away. In fact, probably half of the SaaS playbook I wrote myself, maybe not half, maybe 30%. I wrote myself as direct email responses to people that I would then save in a Google Doc, or like I'd post on a forum, MicroConf Connect or Indie Hackers, and I would respond to a question, and then I would take that and put it in a Google Doc. It was directly answering user questions, So that becomes helpful. The other thing is I've learned just enough about learning just enough about copywriting to be dangerous is a good thing. Like, how do you write a headline? Like, you were saying, great example 10 minutes ago, you were kind of saying, what do founders do? And I said, 9 traits of successful entrepreneurs or something like that. 9 personality traits. That's just copywriting. All it is packaging a paragraph into a single sentence. How can you do that? And so every time I name a podcast or a YouTube video, I think about what will intrigue. What can I deliver on? Because I don't want clickbait, right? What can I deliver on that is interesting, and the most interesting way to state and summarize what's in this episode? So there's that. And then the other thing, I think, is that I'm in the game still. So some folks creating content used to be entrepreneurs. And the further away you get from that, the less and less interesting and less bare metal, the farther away from the bare metal you get. Mm-hmm. And if I sold my last company I'm running 2 today, but I sold my last SaaS company in 2016. That's 8 years ago. If I was not invested in and advising these hundreds of companies, my experience is so irrelevant now that keeps me day to day thinking. All I do is think about this topic when I'm not with my wife and kids and my friends, and that's helpful too. I know everyone can't do that. That's not the secret to it, but it's like, how do you be succinct? How do you create stuff people want? And then how do you package it and write a great headline, that makes, that intrigues people.
Two last questions here. What are you most excited about right now?
It's the book I've mentioned, the exit strategy. The Kickstarter just ended like yesterday as we're recording this, but it's now in pre-order. ExitStrategyBook.com. If folks want to check it out, they can order. It'll be out in a couple months. It's not just for SaaS. It's for any entrepreneurs who might someday sell their company. And I'm excited about it because my wife and I wrote it together. She's a clinical psychologist, a founder coach, a CEO and executive coach. And then me, who has sold 2.5 businesses, depending on how you count, and advised dozens of founders, who have sold their own companies. I'm excited about it because it answers a lot of questions that we get all the time. Same questions over and over. When do I know if it's the right time to sell? Should I sell? How hard is it? What do I do in the middle? What do I do after? All this stuff. So it's one of the best. It's my 5th book, and it's certainly one of the best. So I'm super proud of it. So I'm excited to see in 2025, where it goes, who reads it. I like the reactions to stuff that I create.
Awesome. Last question. Through your life experience, work experience, what's that parting word of wisdom? Maybe it's an ask, a challenge. What do you want to leave the listener with?
I believe that success in any form, whether you're running track, whether you are starting a business, whether you're an artist who's learning to paint and create and craft and market yourself, I think it boils down to 3 things: hard work, luck, and skill. You can't control luck. You can control hard work and creating your own skills, building your own skills. No successful entrepreneur I know did not put in a lot of hard work and develop skills like copywriting, marketing, learning how to package things. Providing the product or the end result that your customer wants is usually somewhat of a commodity. It's usually something other people can do as well. So the biggest thing I think about is how can we be different in a space where people are just looking for the lowest price thing? How can I not be the commodity? And I think that's a skill that everyone should develop. And how do you develop that? Well, you read books by Seth Godin, or you listen to my podcast. It's free every week because I talk about this kind of stuff. And there's a lot, it's developing a skill, which is going to take some work, maybe some nights and weekends of listening to business books or reading them. But I think if you want to get ahead, that's how you got to do it.
Amazing. Rob, thank you for coming on the show.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure, Danny.